I came home from my business partner's funeral with the windows down, even though it was 40 degrees and the heater in my truck hasn't worked right since Obama's second term. I needed the cold air on my face. I needed something to feel real. Before I tell you what happened next, before I tell you what I heard when I got to my daughter's front door, do me a favor. If you've ever felt like your own family had already written you off before you were even gone, hit that like button and subscribe. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight. I'd love to know who's out there listening to this old man's story. My name is Gerald Whitfield. My friends call me Gary. I'm 67 years old, and for the last 9 months I have been sleeping on a pull-out couch in my daughter's spare room, the one she used to call her craft room, the one that still smells like hot glue and old magazines. My wife Carol passed away from a stroke on a Tuesday morning in March. She was making coffee. She just sat down on the kitchen floor and never got up again. 29 years of marriage, and she was gone before I could even get to the hospital. Our house had been in both our names, but the mortgage was heavy, and I couldn't keep it alone on my electrician's pension and Social Security. My daughter Claire and her husband Marcus offered to take me in. They said it was family. They said it was what Carol would have wanted. I believed them because I wanted to, so I moved into the craft room. I pushed the scrapbooking supplies into the closet, and I put my 2 boxes of clothes under the card table. I tried to stay small. I ate what they cooked, washed my own dishes, watched the evening news with the volume low so I wouldn't bother anyone. I told myself it was temporal. I told myself I was healing. Then Roy died. Roy Callahan was my business partner for 22 years. We ran a small electrical contracting company together in upstate New York, before we both retired. Roy never married. He had no children, no siblings. He was a stubborn, funny, infuriating man who put every dollar he ever made back into investments and real estate and never spent a nickel on himself unless it was for fishing equipment. When his lawyer called me 3 weeks ago, I almost didn't pick up. I didn't recognize the Vermont area code. The lawyer's name was Patricia Howe, and she had a voice like someone who did not waste words. "Mr. Whitfield," she said, "Roy Callahan named you his sole beneficiary. The total estate," she told me, "was just under $11 million. There was a commercial property in Burlington he'd owned for 30 years and rented to a grocery chain. There were stock holdings. There was a paid-off lake house on the eastern shore of Lake Champlain, and there was a 40% stake in our old company, which Roy had quietly built back up after we sold it, buying shares over the years without ever telling me. I sat in the parking lot of a Walgreens in Columbus, Ohio, and I read the number she texted me 3 times. I drove straight to the funeral home in Vermont, 400 miles, just me and the cold and the radio. I sat in the front row and I thought about Roy, who used to eat the same peanut butter sandwich every day for lunch and argue with me about the right gauge wire for a 3-bedroom colonial. And I thought about how he'd left everything he had to the only person he called a real friend. I drove back to Columbus with the lawyer's documents in a manila envelope on the passenger seat. $11 million. I had spent 9 months apologizing for my own existence in that craft room, and I was carrying $11 million home to a family that had no idea. My mind was spinning. I was going to tell them. I was going to sit them both down at that kitchen table, and I was going to fix everything. I knew Marcus and Claire were struggling. I heard them through the thin wall at night. Those tight, clipped arguments about money that couples have when they've run out of ways to pretend things are fine. I was going to pay off their mortgage. I was going to set them up. I was going to stop being a burden and start being a father again. I pulled onto their street just after 9 at night. The lights in the kitchen were still on. I could see the yellow glow through the window from the curb. I got out of the truck. I had the envelope under my arm, and I was actually smiling, which felt strange on my face. I walked up the front path, and I was reaching for my key when I heard Marcus's voice through the door. Not muffled. Clear. He was loud in the way people get when they've been going back and forth for a while, and the pretense is gone. "She can't keep covering for him at the bank," he said. I heard the scrape of a chair. His voice moved. "He's going to find out eventually." Claire's voice was lower. I had to lean close to the door to catch it. I know that. But if we move now, before anything comes out, we control the narrative. Her voice was careful, measured, like she'd rehearsed this part. "What does that mean?" Marcus said. "It means Dad," she said. "It means we use Dad." I stopped breathing. Marcus laughed. It was a short, humorless sound. "Gary? Claire, your father lives in the craft room. He doesn't have anything. He has his pension," she said. "He has Social Security. He has that truck. And he's 67 and he lives alone with us. And he keeps forgetting things, Marcus. You said so yourself last week. He left the stove burner on twice. He couldn't remember what day it was. The blood went out of my hands. I pressed them flat against the door. If we get him assessed," Claire continued, "and the assessment goes the way I think it will, we can apply for guardianship, conservatorship. We'd manage his finances. His income comes to us. We handle his care decisions." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "How much are we talking? Pension and Social Security together?" "Probably $2,200 a month. It's not a fortune," she said, "but it covers the payment we're behind on. And if we have legal authority, we can also sell his truck. That's worth maybe $8,000. He's going to fight us," Marcus said. "He won't," Claire said, and her voice was flat, certain, cold. "Dad doesn't fight. He never has. He'll be upset for a day, and then he'll do what we tell him. He always does. That's why Mom always handled everything." I stood on that front porch, and I felt something crack open in my chest. Not surprise. Something worse than surprise. The deep, ugly recognition of a truth you'd been walking around the edges of for months without letting yourself look directly at it. My daughter, my girl, who I'd taught to ride a bike in the church parking lot, who I'd driven to prom and waited up for until 2 a.m, who I'd helped move into her first apartment and her second and into this house. She was talking about me like I was a problem to be managed, like I was a line item. I made my hands stop shaking. I put my key in the lock and opened the door. They were both at the kitchen table. Marcus had a beer in front of him. Claire had her laptop open. They both looked up at the same time with the same exact expression, that split second of guilt that flashes across a face before the performance switches on. "Dad," Claire said, standing up. She smiled. That warm, automatic smile. "You're back. How was the drive?" "We didn't hear you pull in." "Long," I said. I set the envelope face down on the counter. Kept my coat on. "How was the service?" Marcus asked. He was leaning back in his chair, performing casual. He was bad at it. "Quiet," I said. "Roy didn't have many people." I sat down at the table. I looked at my hands. I thought of Roy's peanut butter sandwiches. I thought about $11 million sitting in a manila envelope 8 feet away. I thought about what my daughter had just said. He won't fight. He never has. I let the exhaustion I actually felt fill my face. I let my shoulders fall. I looked up at them both and I said, "Patricia Howe, the lawyer. She called me before the service." Claire leaned forward, her hands folded on the table. "And?" I clasped my own hands together, forcing them to stay still. I looked at the placemat. "Roy didn't have as much as people thought," I said. "The properties had liens against them. Back taxes. His investment accounts were overdrawn. The broker explained it to me, but I didn't understand most of it. Patricia said I might be looking at some liability as the named beneficiary. Back obligations. She mentioned the IRS. I watched their faces. Marcus's casual lean straightened, just slightly. Claire's folded hands tightened. "How much?" Marcus asked. "I don't know exactly." I shook my head, performing confusion, performing the weariness of an old man who'd just driven 800 miles round trip to bury a friend and come home with nothing but more problems. "Patricia said she'd be in touch. She said it could be significant." Claire sat back. The warmth in her face cooled by a degree. By 2 degrees. She was recalculating. I could see it happening behind her eyes. "Well," she said carefully, "we'll figure it out, Dad. Don't worry tonight." I nodded. I said I was tired. I said I was going to bed. I shuffled down the hall in a way I hadn't before, leading with my shoulders, moving like a man who'd given up. I closed the door to the craft room. I sat on the edge of the pull-out couch in the dark, The envelope was still on the kitchen counter. I'd need to get it before morning. I waited 2 hours. I listened to the house go quiet. The television, the sink, the creak of their bedroom door. Then I crept back to the kitchen in my socks. I took the envelope. I took my phone. I went into the downstairs bathroom and I locked the door and I sat on the closed lid of the toilet in the dark. Patricia Howe answered on the third ring. She didn't sound put out by the hour. "Mr. Whitfield," she said. "I've been waiting to hear from you. I need to ask you some things," I said. "Fast. About the estate, and then I need to ask you something else." She was sharp and direct, which I appreciated. She confirmed everything again. The commercial property, the stock holdings, the lake house on Lake Champlain, all of it free and clear. No liens, no back taxes. Roy had been meticulous. She had all the paperwork ready to transfer. Then I told her what I'd heard through the front door. She was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was measured and serious. "Mr. Whitfield, what you're describing is a conservatorship proceeding. If they move forward with that, they would petition the court, present evidence of cognitive decline, bring in a medical evaluation. If a judge grants it, they would have legal authority over your finances and your living situation." "Can they actually do it?" I asked. "Can they take my money, my pension, everything?" "If the conservatorship is granted and you're declared incompetent, yes," she said, "they would become your legal managers. Every dollar that comes in would go through them first, and any assets in your name at the time of filing, including any inheritance, could become subject to their control, depending on how it's structured." My stomach went cold. "The 11 million, I said. "What if we move the assets before they file?" Another brief pause. "That is exactly the right question," she said. I told her what I wanted to do. It took about 20 minutes. She asked good questions. She didn't waste time on sentiment. By the end, she said she could have the first documents drafted within 48 hours, and that I should not sign anything my daughter or son-in-law put in front of me under any circumstances. "One more thing," I said before I hung up. "My daughter mentioned they're behind on a payment. I don't know which one. I need to know everything, Patricia. I need to know what they owe and to who." "That's a different kind of work," she said. "I know," I said. "Roy trusted you. I need to know if I can." There was a short silence. "You can," she said. I deleted the call history. I went back to the craft room. I lay down in my coat because the room was cold, and I stared at the ceiling, and I did not sleep. Over the next week, I became the man they expected me to be. I left a burner on. I called Marcus by the wrong name twice, looking confused and apologetic when he corrected me. I sat in front of the television for long stretches, not watching it. I let Claire catch me, standing in the middle of the kitchen holding a glass of water with a blank expression on my face. I made it easy for them. I gave them exactly what they needed. And while I was doing that, Patricia Howe was working. What she found made the cold in my chest go permanent. Marcus had been gambling. Not online slots and poker. The way Jenna had in that other old man story I heard once. Marcus had been gambling on sports. Football, basketball, baseball, any season that was running. He had accounts on 6 different platforms. He'd opened most of them in the past 18 months. The total he'd run through them was just under $140,000. He was down about $90,000 of that. Money he'd borrowed against his 401k. Money he'd taken from a home equity line he'd opened without telling Claire. And money he'd borrowed from 3 separate cash advance services using their joint account information. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the signature on the home equity line. Patricia's investigator had pulled the application. Marcus had forged Claire's signature. She hadn't known about the equity line. She didn't know the house was leveraged. She was already underwater on the mortgage, and she didn't know her husband had quietly carved another $60,000 out of whatever equity they had and fed it into a sportsbook app on his phone. I sat in the downstairs bathroom at 2 a.m. reading Patricia's text summary, and I thought about my daughter. I thought about her voice, flat and cold. He won't fight. He never has. She had been cruel to me. She had been willing to take my independence, my money, my truck, all of it. But she was also married to a man who had been lying to her face for a year and a half, and she had no idea how deep the water was. It didn't make what she was doing right. It didn't make her the victim in all of this. But it was something. It was context. On the 8th day, they came into the craft room together in the evening. Marcus leaned against the doorframe. Claire sat on the edge of the card table. She had the practiced expression of someone about to say something she'd rehearsed. "Dad," she started. "Marcus and I have been talking. We're really worried about you." I looked up from my book. I made my eyes go wide and soft. "Worried? I'm all right, sweetheart. You've been forgetting things," she said. "The burner, the dates. And I can tell you're not sleeping. I can hear you up at night." She leaned in and put her hand on my knee. "That's why we made an appointment for you. Just a checkup. A doctor who specializes in senior health. His name is Dr. Farrow. He's coming here Friday morning to talk with you." I kept my face soft and confused. I said, "A doctor? At the house?" Marcus said, "It's easier this way. Less stressful than an office." "It's just a conversation," Claire said. "He's going to ask you a few questions, just to make sure we're taking good care of you." I nodded slowly. I said, "All right, Claire, if you think it's best." And then I said, "I'm a little cold in here. The heater in this room never seems to kick on. Has Marcus taken a look at it?" Marcus shifted against the door frame. "I'll look at it this weekend," he said. And he never would. I waited until midnight. I went to the bathroom. I called Patricia. "They have someone coming Friday," I told her. "A doctor. Farrow. I don't know what kind of doctor, but I know what it's for. I'll look him up," she said. She called me back inside 10 minutes. Dr. Louis Farrow. Not a geriatric specialist. He's a general practitioner who has consulted in 2 conservatorship proceedings in the last 3 years. Both times the family got what they were after. He's not a criminal, but he's not neutral either. "Friday morning is in 60 hours, I said. "Can we be ready?" "We're already ready, Gary," she said. The Burlington property title transferred to the trust yesterday. The stock accounts will follow tomorrow. The lake house takes a few more days, but it's flagged. As of right now, even if they file for conservatorship and somehow get it granted, they can't touch anything in the trust. Not without proving you were incompetent at the time you created it, and you sound just fine. "Good," I said. "Now tell me about the mortgage." She told me. Patricia had found a contact at the bank holding the primary mortgage. The note was 3 months in arrears. Marcus had been making partial payments and partial payments only, pulling money from different places to keep the foreclosure notice from hitting the mailbox. It hadn't worked. The formal notice had already been issued. They had 45 days. "I want to buy it," I said. "The mortgage?" "All of it. The primary note and the equity line," Marcus opened. "Whatever the bank will take to sell me the paper. Make it happen." "Gary," she said carefully, "you'd be their creditor. You'd own their debt." "I know what I'd be," I said. The Friday morning was gray and cold. Claire had cleaned the living room. She'd put a throw blanket on the couch and moved my usual chair closer to the window where the light was better, like she was staging a scene. Marcus had gone to work. He'd kissed her on the cheek at the door, and I'd watched from the hallway. Dr. Farrow arrived at 10. He was a trim man with careful eyes and a briefcase that looked expensive. He smiled at me with professional warmth, the kind that goes exactly to the edge of the eyes and stops. "Gerald," he said, sitting across from me. "Mind if I call you Gerald?" "Gary," I said. "Gary." He nodded. "Your daughter tells me you've been going through a really difficult stretch. Losing your wife, the move, and now your friend. That's a lot of change in a short time." Claire sat on the couch, her hands in her lap. "I've been hanging in there," I said. My voice was quiet, old. He asked me what year it was, what month, who the president was. He asked me to remember 3 words: apple, Tuesday, blue. He asked me to count backward from 100 by 7s. I answered every question wrong. Slowly, with the right amount of searching hesitation, I watched the pen move in his notepad. He said, "Your daughter mentioned the stove. Can you tell me about that?" I looked at Claire. I looked back at him. I shook my head a little, like the memory was underwater. That was when I stopped. I straightened up in the chair. Not dramatically, just the way a man straightens when he's done pretending. I put both hands flat on my knees. I looked at Dr. Louis Farrow, and I spoke in the voice I used for 22 years running a crew of electricians on commercial construction sites. Clear, steady, no room for interpretation. I want you to close your notepad, I said. He blinked. Close it, I said. He closed it. I know why you're here, I said. And I know why she asked you. And I want you to know that I know the difference between a geriatric specialist and a general practitioner who signed his name to 2 conservatorship petitions in 3 years. I looked at him directly. Whatever you were about to write in that notebook, you should think carefully about what your license is worth to you. He looked at Claire. She had gone completely still. Gary, she said. Her voice had a warning in it. What are you doing? I'm done, I said. I turned to her. I've been done for about 8 days. I've just been waiting for the right moment. What does that mean? She said. It means, Claire, that I heard you. 9 days ago. I came home from Roy's funeral. I walked up to your front door, and I heard everything. What you said about my pension. The truck. The word conservatorship. The part where you said, I never fight back. The color drained from her face so fast it was like watching a lamp switch off. Doctor, Farrow snapped his briefcase shut with both hands. I think, he said. I'll leave you to this. I think you will. He was gone in under a minute. We heard the front door, then his car, then nothing. Claire sat on the couch looking at me like she was seeing me for the first time. Or maybe like she was seeing me at all for the first time in a long time. Her mouth was open slightly. She looked young. She looked like the girl in the church parking lot, learning to ride the bike. I was going to give it all to you, I said. My voice was quiet. I need you to hear that. I came home from that funeral, and I was going to sit down with you and Marcus and tell you the truth. Roy left me $11 million. Free and clear. No debts. No back taxes. No IRS. I lied to you that first night because I just heard what you were planning for me, and I needed time to protect myself. But before I heard you behind that door, I was going to give you this house free and clear. I was going to pay off everything you owe. I was going to buy myself a little place somewhere and be your father from a distance, if that's what you needed. Claire made a sound, low, like something had been knocked out of her. 11 million, she whispered. I looked at her. Is that the part you're focused on right now? Her eyes filled. Dad, she said. Before you say anything, I said. There's something else you need to know. And this part isn't about me. She looked at me steadily now. Something in her face had shifted. The performance was gone. She looked exhausted. I told her about Marcus. I didn't rush it. I laid it out the way Patricia had laid it out for me. The gambling accounts, the 401k loans, the cash advance services. I let that settle. Then I told her about the equity line, the $60,000, the forged signature. She sat very still through all of it. She didn't cry. She just sat there with her hands in her lap and her face going through things I couldn't name. He forged my signature, she said. Yes. He put a lien on our house. Yes. She stood up. She walked to the kitchen window and stood there with her back to me looking out at the backyard. I could see her shoulders moving, her breathing working hard to stay even. How long? She asked. About 18 months. I said. From what Patricia's people found. Who's Patricia? My lawyer in Vermont, I said. Roy's lawyer. She's been working for me this past week. Claire turned around. The tears were there now, but they were the quiet kind. She wasn't a woman who cried loudly. She never had been. When she was 7 and she fell off that bike and broke her wrist, she sat on the asphalt and pressed her mouth tight and just breathed until I got to her. She looked at me and said, You could have just left. I could have, I said. Why didn't you? Because you're my daughter, I said. And because I needed to know how bad it was. For you. Not for me. For you. She sat back down on the couch. She put her face in her hands. Her shoulders moved. I let her cry. After a few minutes, she looked up and said, The house. The mortgage. I told her. 3 months behind. The formal notice. 45 days. She closed her eyes. Of course, she said. It gets worse, I said. Patricia believes you can likely bring a forgery claim against Marcus for the equity line. That's a civil matter and possibly criminal. There are options there if you want to pursue them. But there's something you need to know about the house first. She looked at me. I bought the debt, I said. Yesterday morning. My trust purchased both notes from the bank, the primary mortgage, and the equity line. The bank was happy to sell. They're out of the picture. As of this morning, I am your mortgage holder. Claire sat very still. I own this house, Claire, I said. And as the legal owner of the debt, I have some decisions to make about what happens next. She looked at me steadily. She didn't beg. She didn't bargain. She just looked at me with her mother's eyes and waited. I have a 30-day notice ready, I said. I could give it to you right now. Legally, it's entirely within my rights. She nodded once, slowly. Okay, she said. The word was just barely audible. I looked at my daughter. I thought about her on the phone behind that door, her voice flat and certain. He won't fight. I thought about her sitting across from that doctor, staging the room, performing concern while she waited to take my life apart. I thought about the craft room with the scrapbooking supplies in the closet, and the pull-out couch where I'd slept for 9 months in someone else's house after losing everything. I thought about Carol. I thought about what Carol would say right now if she were standing in this living room. She would say, I'd made my point. She would say it was time to decide what kind of man I was. I reached into my coat pocket. I put the 30-day notice on the coffee table between us, but I kept my hand on it. Here's what I'm not going to do, I said. I'm not going to put my daughter on the street. I'm not Roy Callahan. Roy never had a family, and I think it cost him something, even if he never said so. This house, this debt, I'm forgiving it. All of it. The mortgage is cleared. The equity line is cleared. As of today, Claire, you own this house free and clear. She blinked. But Marcus doesn't, I said. I need him gone. Not because I hate him, because he forged your name on a legal document to feed a gambling addiction, and he's been lying to you for 18 months while you tried to figure out how to take my pension to make ends meet. He doesn't get to stay here. That's not negotiable. She was crying again. Quiet. Still. What you did to me, I said. Planning to take my money. The doctor. All of it. I'm not pretending that was nothing. It was wrong. You know it was wrong. But I also know you were desperate, and I know you didn't understand why you were desperate. So we're going to deal with that together. Not with money. Not right away. We're going to deal with it the slow way, which is the only way that ever works. Claire looked at me for a long time. She said, I'm sorry, Dad. She said it plainly. No performance. No warm smile. Just the words. I know, I said. I picked up the eviction notice. I folded it and put it back in my pocket. I drove to Vermont 2 days later. Patricia met me at the lake house with a set of keys and a casserole one of her paralegals had made, which I thought was either very kind or very strange. The house was small and weathered, sitting back from the lakeshore on a slight rise. The porch faced east. In the mornings, the light came off the water and hit the windows, and the whole place went gold. I found Roy's fishing rods in the back closet. I found his peanut butter in the kitchen cupboard. Same brand he'd always bought. A new jar with the seal still on. I sat on the porch the first morning with coffee, and I thought about the man who'd left me all of this. Roy had no family, but he'd made sure I could keep mine, even after what they'd tried to do. He probably would have told me I was being soft. He would have said it with that flat Vermont expression he had, shaking his head a little, and then he would have poured me coffee, and we would have sat there, not saying anything, which was usually enough. Patricia and I spent the following weeks establishing the foundation. I called it the Carol Whitfield Fund, which I think would have embarrassed Carol and pleased her in equal measure. The purpose was simple and specific. Legal advocacy for seniors facing financial exploitation by family members. Emergency legal counsel. Emergency housing resources. A direct line that someone could call at 3 in the morning if they needed help. Roy's commercial property in Burlington generates enough rental income to run it indefinitely. We've been operational for 4 months. We've helped 9 people so far. We stopped one guardianship proceeding. Got a woman out of a situation very much like my craft room. Helped a man in his 70s recover money his son had quietly transferred out of a joint account. We've become the people who answer the call. Claire drives up to Vermont on the second Sunday of every month. She brings groceries I didn't ask for and she sits on the porch and we talk. Real talking, the kind that costs something. She filed the civil complaint against Marcus for the forged signatures. He's in a program now, court-ordered. She told me last month that she thinks she might have loved him more than she saw him clearly, which I thought was an honest thing to say. She told me she hasn't stopped thinking about what I said, about coming home from that funeral with hope, about wanting to be a father again. I told her I was still figuring out what that looked like. For both of us, the road back from something like this is not straight. It doubles back on itself. It has weather, but it's still a road. I sit on Roy's porch every morning now. The lake is different at different hours. Early, it's flat and gray and very still. By mid-morning, the light hits it, and it goes all the way to blue. I drink my coffee, and I think about 2 men who spent 22 years debating wire gauge on a job site, and how one of them left the other everything he had, because that was the only way he knew to say what he never said out loud. I learned something this year. A hard thing, learned the hard way, which is usually the only kind that sticks. Your family loves you most completely when they need something from you. When you stop being useful, you become a problem. That's not everybody. That's not every family. But if you feel it happening that slow, cold shift when your presence changes from welcome to burden, trust what you feel. Protect yourself. Get your paperwork in order. Find someone like Patricia. Someone who answers the phone and asks good questions. You are not a ghost. You are not a craft room. You are not a line item in someone else's budget. You built something in this life. You gave things. You were here. That matters. Make sure the people making decisions about your future understand exactly how much it matters. If this story hit close to home tonight, please do me a favor, hit that like button and let me know you were here. Subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from right now? And have you ever had to fight for yourself inside your own family? I'll be reading every single one. Thank you for listening. I'll see you in the next story.